The war-torn planet of Rylus lay in ruins beneath a pale and sickly sky, the once vibrant forests now reduced to charred remnants, their towering trees smoldering in the wake of countless battles. John Marlowe, a mercenary who had seen it all, stood among the ashes, his boots crunching over scorched earth as he surveyed the battlefield. His mission was simple: mediate a truce between two warring alien factions, the Nashari and the Varine, both of whom had devastated the planet in their relentless struggle for control. John's reputation preceded him wherever he went. He was a man known for being able to navigate the chaos of intergalactic wars, defusing situations with his cool-headed approach. He was a former Special Forces operative turned mercenary, skilled in the art of both negotiation and combat. The Varine and the Nashari were both powerful and proud, but John's unique ability to outthink his opponents had earned him both respect and fear. This mission should have been no different, at least, that's what he told himself. The ruins stretched for miles, with the remnants of advanced alien technology scattered across the barren landscape. Bodies, both alien and human, littered the ground, casualties of a war that had raged on for far too long. The day was still, save for the distant hum of hovercraft engines, and the occasional blaster fire in the distance. John was no stranger to battle, but this felt different. The planet seemed to have given up on itself, its air heavy with the weight of despair. His communications device buzzed in his ear. A quick glance at the screen revealed an encrypted message from his contact within the Varine camp. The Nashari had broken their word again. Their leaders had promised to meet, but now they were claiming that John's presence was an insult to their honor. The Varine weren't pleased with the slight, and tensions were rising by the minute. Typical, John muttered to himself, his fingers tightening around the hilt of his plasma blade. His first instinct was to get on the comms and negotiate a solution. But he knew better. Words wouldn't solve this. He needed to get to the meeting site before the situation escalated further. As he made his way toward the designated meeting point, a sudden movement caught his eye. At first, he thought it was another Varine scout, but as he approached, the figure revealed itself to be a girl, a small alien, crouched beside a fallen tree, her hands shaking as she clutched her sides. Her skin was a pale lavender hue, her wide, tear-streaked eyes reflecting a deep sadness that John couldn't ignore. She was clearly not a soldier, nor did she belong to any faction involved in the war. She was alone. John stopped dead in his tracks. His instincts screamed at him to keep moving, to stick to the mission. But something about the girl pulled him in. She was starving, weak, and utterly defenseless, traits John recognized all too well. He had seen countless individuals fall victim to the chaos of war, their lives reduced to nothing but survival. The girl's eyes locked onto his, fear flashing across her face as if she had seen something she shouldn't have. Before she could react, John approached, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Hey," he called softly, crouching down to her level. "I'm not here to hurt you. You look like you could use some help." The girl didn't respond at first, her gaze darting around as if trying to figure out whether he was a threat. She opened her mouth, but no words came out, only a dry, rasping sound. It was clear she hadn't had water in days. John reached into his pack and pulled out a ration bar, breaking it into smaller pieces. The girl's eyes followed his every move, and then, cautiously, she reached out with trembling hands. She took the food, her eyes not leaving his as she ate. Her hunger was palpable, each bite a desperate attempt to restore the strength she had lost. She didn't speak as she ate, but John could see the gratitude in her eyes. "Where are your people?" John asked, his voice low and steady. He didn't expect an answer immediately, but he couldn't help but ask. In his line of work, understanding the enemy, or at least their motivations, was half the battle. The girl swallowed hard and finally spoke, her voice a soft, broken whisper. "Dead," she muttered, her words heavy with grief. "My people are gone." John didn't press further, allowing her the space to process. The last thing he wanted to do was rush her into revealing painful memories. Instead, he focused on her immediate needs. The air around them was thick with the scent of burning ruins, and the distant sounds of gunfire reminded John that time was running out. But in that moment, nothing else mattered. Helping this girl was the right thing to do. "I can help you," he said, his voice firm, though he didn't know how. His mission to mediate peace now seemed less important in the face of this young alien's despair. "We'll get you out of here. I'll make sure you're safe." The girl's eyes flickered with a mix of disbelief and hope, but her expression quickly hardened. "Why?" she asked, her voice wavering between skepticism and genuine confusion. "Why would you help me? You're human." John's brow furrowed. There was a bitterness in her tone, one that told him her people had been betrayed before, perhaps by humans or others in the galaxy. In his experience, most of the species he dealt with were quick to judge, even quicker to hate. But he wasn't like most humans. He didn't seek glory or gain, he wanted peace, something the galaxy seemed to have lost long ago. "I help people," he said simply, shrugging as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Doesn't matter who they are." For the first time, the girl seemed to soften, her posture loosening as she looked at him with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. "You don't fear me?" she asked, her voice still shaky but tinged with something else, an emotion John couldn't quite place. "No," he replied. "I don't." And with that, the walls between them began to crumble. As the hours passed, John stayed with the girl, tending to her needs as best as he could. He gave her water, food, and a safe place to rest. He didn't ask too many questions, allowing her time to heal both physically and emotionally. In return, she began to share bits and pieces of her past, her people, and the galaxy she had once known. Her name was Zara, and she had been a member of the Varian's peaceful Ruthian species, caught in the crossfire of a war she hadn't chosen. Zara's people had been the first casualties of the Varian and Nashari conflict, their cities burned to the ground by alien invaders, their culture erased in the name of power and control. Zara was one of the last survivors of her kind, a living testament to the destruction that war brought. She had escaped with nothing but the clothes on her back, trying to find refuge among the warring factions, but no one wanted to help her. "Why did you save me?" Zara asked quietly, her voice filled with suspicion and gratitude in equal measure. "I'm nothing. My people are nothing." John looked at her, his gaze steady. "You're not nothing," he said firmly. "You're more than your past, more than your species. You're alive, and that counts for something." Zara looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling. "I don't know if I can trust you," she whispered, almost to herself. "I've been betrayed too many times." "I understand," John said. "But I'm not asking you to trust me right now. All I'm asking is for a chance." The weight of her past, the loss of her people, and the horror of war hung heavy in the air. John knew this wasn't just a simple case of offering a meal. It was a moment of connection in the midst of chaos, a spark of humanity that Zara hadn't experienced in a long time. In the quiet of the ruined world around them, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, something shifted between them. John knew this was only the beginning of a much larger journey, one where trust, bravery, and compassion would be tested in ways either of them could foresee. And as he looked at Zara, her brokenness and her strength both so apparent, he knew that this moment, however small, had the potential to change everything. The next morning, John woke to a sky tinged with blood-red hues as the sun struggled to rise above the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the war-torn landscape. The constant hum of the battlefield was less apparent now, replaced by a stillness that seemed almost unnatural. The sound of Zara's breathing beside him was steady, her body curled up in the corner of the makeshift shelter he had created for them. Nothing more than a few scavenged materials, but it was enough to provide some comfort. John stood up slowly, stretching the stiffness from his muscles as he checked the perimeter. The factions had agreed to a meeting in a nearby neutral zone, an ancient structure once used by the locals as a ceremonial gathering place. The location was perfect, a site free from the ruin of battle, with high vantage points where John could observe and keep an eye on both sides. But as the hours passed, the uneasy feeling that had settled in his chest the night before only grew stronger. Something wasn't right. Despite the brief moment of peace between him and Zara, John's mission was far from over. The truce he had been sent to broker remained his top priority, even though his heart was tugged by the responsibility he felt for the alien girl who had grown dependent on him. Her trust was fragile, and in his heart, he knew that he could not allow her to become another casualty of the war. Her hope was now in his hands, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. John took a deep breath and turned back to Zara, who was now sitting up, her eyes wide as she scanned the horizon. She had grown stronger overnight, though she still looked fragile, her violet skin faintly tinged with gray from the lack of nourishment. But there was something else in her eyes, something that hadn't been there the day before. It was a spark of curiosity, of hope that John had ignited with his simple acts of kindness. "You ready to move?" he asked, breaking the silence. Zara nodded, though she hesitated before speaking. "What will happen if they don't agree to the truce?" John met her gaze with a steady expression, knowing that the truth was not one he could sugarcoat. "Then this war will keep going. More people will die. More worlds will burn." Zara's face darkened as she looked away, clearly pained by the thought. "I don't want that. I just want my people to be at peace." John reached out, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "We'll do our best to make that happen. I won't let them destroy any more of your people." Her gaze flickered toward the horizon, where the meeting site loomed. "And what about you, human? Will they destroy you too?" He smiled faintly. "I've faced worse. And I'll keep fighting if it comes to that." With no more words needed, they set out toward the ruins of the ancient ceremonial ground. It was a journey that seemed to stretch on forever. As they walked, John couldn't help but notice the tension in the air. His instincts were always sharp, and they were screaming at him to remain cautious. Something didn't feel right, and it wasn't just the weight of the impending negotiations. The structures around them were imposing, crumbling remnants of a once great civilization that had existed long before either the Nashari or Varine ever arrived. John knew little about the original inhabitants of Rylus, but it was clear their wisdom had been lost to time, swallowed up by the greed and violence of the new conquerors. As they approached the central meeting area, the sound of footsteps reached John's ears, a single figure stepping out from behind a ruined pillar. John's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his weapon. It was Yerrick, the commanding officer of the Varine, his imposing figure towering over the ground as he approached with a deliberate and slow gait. He was dressed in the typical Varine battle armor, but the coldness in his eyes was unmistakable. "Well, well," Yerrick said, his voice like gravel. "The human arrives, and with him, an unexpected companion. I didn't expect you to bring a Nashari child to our meeting, John." "How quaint." John's grip tightened around the hilt of his weapon, but he kept his voice calm. "This is not a Nashari child. This is Zara. And she is no one's prisoner." Yerrick's lips curled into a sneer. "A pity. She could be useful to us. But I'm not here to waste time on sentimental matters. I've already had enough of the Nashari's arrogance. This meeting is only happening because I agreed to it. But make no mistake, nothing will change." "I think you're underestimating the situation," John said, his tone low but firm. "The truce is not just about saving face. If we don't come to an agreement, there will be no winners in this war. Just endless destruction. Think about the long-term consequences, Yerrick." Yerrick's gaze flickered to Zara for a moment before returning to John, his expression unreadable. "I've seen the consequences. I've seen entire species fall at my feet. But you, human, you're different. You've managed to outsmart every opponent you've faced. But you won't outsmart me." John raised an eyebrow. "I don't need to outsmart you. I just need to make you see reason." As he spoke, two more figures emerged from the shadows, Tavrin, the leader of the Nashari, and his second-in-command, Voker. Tavrin was a calculating and ruthless figure, his alien features sleek and angular, his posture poised with the pride of his people. Voker was smaller, but his reputation as a deadly strategist had earned him respect across the galaxy. Both were armed, their expressions hard and unyielding. John could feel the tension rise, and he knew that the meeting would soon spiral out of control if he didn't act fast. "This isn't just about you or your people," John said, stepping forward. It's about peace. About survival. Tavern's voice was smooth and cold. And what do you propose, human? Another of your solutions where you come in, pretend to fix everything, and leave with your pockets full while the rest of us continue fighting? John kept his eyes fixed on Tavern, his jaw set in determination. I propose we stop the cycle of violence before it gets worse. You two have been at war for years. Think about the destruction. Think about the people who have lost everything. A long silence followed, and for a moment, it seemed as though either faction would speak. Then, suddenly, the sound of a weapon being drawn echoed through the ruins. A Varine soldier, acting on his commander's orders, leveled a rifle toward Zara, his finger hovering near the trigger. John's instincts kicked in. In one fluid motion, he drew his own weapon, a compact plasma pistol, and fired a single shot. The soldier collapsed, his weapon clattering to the ground. No! Yarrick shouted, but it was too late. The damage was done. You don't get to threaten her, John said, his voice low and deadly calm. Not now, not ever. Zara, wide-eyed and trembling, looked at John as if seeing him for the first time. Her expression was one of shock, not from the violence, but from the protection he had just offered her. Yarrick's rage was palpable, his body trembling with anger. But John didn't flinch. The message had been sent. The truce was still possible, but only if both sides were willing to take the first step. A long silence stretched between them, but the tension was different now. Something had shifted. Zara's life mattered, and John had proven it. In that moment, despite the looming threats of war, something akin to respect began to take root in the hearts of those gathered. For the first time in years, John felt that perhaps peace wasn't entirely out of reach. The days following the tense negotiation marked a subtle shift in the air. What had been a battlefield of uncertainty and bloodshed began to take on a different rhythm. The truce had held, though tenuous at best. The factions had agreed to a temporary ceasefire, a fragile moment in time that allowed for dialogue to replace the ever-present sound of weapons firing. But peace, true peace, was never something easily achieved, especially in the face of deep-seated hatred and centuries of war. For John, the days were filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the hum of communication devices, the quiet whispers of Zara's presence, and the distant sound of skirmishes that still erupted in the periphery of the neutral zone. Though the truce held, it was clear that not everyone shared the same vision of peace. Zara had stayed by John's side, her trust in him deepening each day. She was more than just an alien girl in need of protection now, she was a companion, someone John had come to care for deeply. Her bright violet eyes, though filled with sorrow at the memory of her fallen people, now held something else, gratitude. And perhaps, just perhaps, something more. It was a feeling that John was unwilling to acknowledge fully, but it was there, growing like a tender seed buried deep within him. As the ceasefire continued, the two spent their time walking through the ruins of the ancient city, exploring what little remained of a civilization lost to time. They would speak little, each of them lost in their thoughts, but there was a comfort in the shared silence. Zara had learned to speak more in the common tongue, her voice soft but growing stronger with each passing day. On the fourth day after the truce had been declared, John was once again called to a meeting with the leaders of both factions. The ceasefire was growing more fragile, and a decision had to be made. Was the truce merely a brief reprieve, or was it the beginning of a lasting peace? The meeting would decide their fate. John, with Zara at his side, walked to the designated neutral zone. The ruins of the ancient temple stood silent as they approached, a stark reminder of the power of time and conflict. The leaders of both the Nashari and the Varine were already waiting, their presence intimidating and silent. Tavrin, the ever-calculating leader of the Nashari, stood tall and poised, his dark features unreadable. Yarrick, the Varine commander, was opposite him, his posture tense and aggressive, a storm brewing beneath his icy exterior. John could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. It wasn't just a matter of negotiating peace anymore. There was something deeper at stake now, a force beyond politics or strategy. His heart ached for Zara, And in that moment, he realized just how deeply connected they had become. The love, though unspoken, was undeniable. As they entered the chamber, the leaders turned to face him, their expressions cold but respectful. "John," Tavern greeted, his voice smooth, measured. "You have brought your companion with you. Do you believe her presence will change the tides of this negotiation?" John met Tavern's gaze, unwavering. "I believe her presence here shows that the future is not set in stone. Peace is possible, but it requires us all to see the bigger picture." Yerrick scoffed, stepping forward. "Peace? Peace is a fragile illusion, human. You've seen the carnage we've endured. Do you think words will heal what blood has stained?" John's gaze hardened. "No, Yerrick. But words can prevent more bloodshed. And right now, they're the only weapon we have." There was a moment of silence, tension filling the air like a tangible force. But then, something shifted. Zara, who had been standing quietly beside John, spoke up. Her voice was soft, but there was an undeniable strength behind it. "We have lost so much," she said, her eyes flickering toward Tavern and Yerrick. "My people have lost everything. But I do not want to see more of your people suffer. War takes lives. Peace gives them back." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, a flicker of something resembling doubt crossed Yerrick's eyes. He looked at Zara, and for a moment, the mask of the cold conqueror slipped. "You speak with the wisdom of a far older soul," Tavern said, his tone almost respectful. "But words alone are not enough. Your people have suffered, Nashari. And we Vareen are not blind to that. We, too, have lost much." It seemed for a brief moment that peace might be possible. But then, as if on cue, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A distant explosion rang out, followed by the unmistakable sounds of blaster fire. John's heart sank as the realization hit him like a cold slap. Someone had broken the truce. Without a word, John sprinted toward the source of the explosion, with Zara close behind him. They reached the edge of the neutral zone, only to find a group of Vareen soldiers facing off against a small band of Nashari rebels. The battle was far from a full-scale war, but it was enough to shatter the fragile peace. John's mind raced as he assessed the situation. There was no time for words now, only action. In an instant, he was on the move, his weapon drawn, his body moving with the precision of years of combat experience. He took down the first Vareen soldier with a well-placed shot to the head. The second fell just as quickly, and soon, the rest of the soldiers were on the defensive. Zara, though frightened, stood beside him, her alien abilities kicking in as she summoned her own power, energy crackling in the air around her. She had grown more confident in her powers, but it was clear that John was still the one in control of the situation. It didn't take long for the battle to subside, the remaining soldiers either fleeing or surrendering. The Nashari rebels, seeing that John had won the skirmish, took the opportunity to withdraw, leaving the battlefield eerily quiet once again. John turned to Zara, his heart racing. "Are you okay?" Zara nodded, though her face was pale. I was scared. But you saved us." John's chest tightened, and for a moment, the gravity of the situation seemed to crash down around him. He had always known he was capable of fighting, but he had never imagined it would be for this. For peace. For Zara. As they returned to the neutral zone, John's thoughts were a whirlwind. The ceasefire had been shattered, but the leaders were still there, watching him as he approached. Tavern's face was hard, his eyes narrowed, while Yerrick's expression was unreadable. "You did what you had to do, human," Tavern said, his voice cold, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a grudging respect. Yerrick, however, was less inclined to view the situation with such understanding. "You've jeopardized everything, human. This betrayal cannot go unpunished." John stood tall, his voice unwavering. "You're wrong, Yerrick. The betrayal wasn't mine. It was the actions of those who don't care about peace. But I won't let that stop me. I'll fight until the end to protect Zara and make sure her people get what they deserve." The air between them was thick with tension. But John's words hung in the silence like a challenge, one that neither Tavern nor Yerrick could ignore. Despite the violence, despite the threats, there was something more now, something unspoken in the bond between John and Zara. A force stronger than war. As they left the neutral zone, John's heart remained heavy, but there was a resolve that had taken root within him. The path ahead would be filled with obstacles, betrayal, and heartache. But he would not give up. Not on Zara. Not on peace. Because in the end, love was the only thing that could save them all. The days following the failed peace talks were filled with a quiet tension, a sense of looming catastrophe that weighed heavily on John's heart. The truce had broken, and the fragile alliance that had seemed within reach now seemed an impossible dream. Yet, amid the growing chaos and the escalating conflict, there was one thing that remained constant: Zara. As John prepared for the inevitable final confrontation, a thought kept repeating in his mind: the war was not the battle. It was love. Zara had become more than a mission, more than a duty. She was a part of him now, and he would do whatever it took to protect her. The world around them had grown colder as the Nashari and Varine forces mobilized for the final assault. The planet, once home to thriving civilizations, now lay in ruins. The sky had darkened, and the once great cities had become nothing more than shattered remnants of a lost time. Yet amidst the destruction, a sense of finality had begun to take hold. There would be no more peace talks, no more negotiations. The factions were ready to finish what they had started, and John knew that if he wanted to protect Zara and prevent further bloodshed, he would have to stop them. "We can't keep running, John," Zara said, her voice soft but firm as they stood on the balcony of the crumbling palace. She had come to him the night before, and the words they exchanged then still echoed in his mind. "I know, Zara. But we can't win this with force alone. We need to find a way to make them listen," John replied, staring out at the desolate landscape before them. His thoughts were a storm, the weight of the decision pressing on him like a physical burden. Zara placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch both comforting and grounding. "You've always fought for others. But now, you must fight for us." It was the truth that John had known all along but had not wanted to acknowledge. This wasn't just about peace between factions. It was about their future, together. The thought terrified him. He had always fought battles in the name of duty, of honor, but the idea of fighting for love, that was something new. The plan, as it stood, was simple but dangerous. John and Zara would infiltrate the heart of the Varine stronghold, where the leaders of both factions had gathered to make their final decisions. John knew that this would be his last chance to prevent the war from consuming them all. And Zara, she would be his ally, the one person he trusted more than anyone else in the galaxy. "Are you sure about this?" John asked, his voice low as he turned to face Zara. "There's no turning back once we start." Zara nodded, her face unwavering. "I'm not afraid. We've come this far, and I won't let this war take you from me." It was that look in her eyes, the unyielding resolve, the quiet strength, that made him realize that this wasn't just about survival. This was about something far greater. This was about love. And love, he understood now, was the force that could save them all. The final assault. The infiltration had been a delicate operation, and John had known that time was against them. As they neared the Varine stronghold, their stealthy approach became more difficult. The Nashari had regrouped, and the Varine forces were on high alert. Every corner seemed to hold a threat, every shadow a potential enemy. But they pushed forward undeterred. John had trained for moments like this, missions where every second counted, where the stakes were life and death. He was a soldier, a warrior forged by years of combat. But this was different. This was not a mission where victory could be measured by kill counts. This was a battle for peace, for a future where people like Zara and him could live free of the fear of war. As they entered the stronghold, the air grew thick with the buzz of combat. The Varine military had set up defenses, and John and Zara had to navigate through the war-torn corridors with utmost caution. Every step was a risk, every move a gamble. But they were close. They could feel it, the heart of the battle. The command center was a massive structure at the center of the stronghold, a towering building that seemed impervious to assault. But John was no stranger to impossible odds. He had fought countless battles, each more difficult than the last, and now, he was fighting for the one thing he held most dear, Zara. They reached the command center under the cover of darkness, their stealth suits blending into the shadows. John motioned for Zara to stay behind as he approached the main doors. He could hear the voices inside, the heated arguments between the two factions as they argued over the future of the planet. Their voices were laced with venom, their hearts filled with hatred. And yet John knew that this was the moment when everything would change. Zara, John whispered into his communicator. Stay ready. Zara's voice came through the static, calm and steady. Always. With that, John charged through the doors, his weapon raised and ready. The room fell silent as he entered, the leaders of both factions turning to face him in shock and disbelief. You've come to stop us? Tavrin, the Nashari leader, said, his voice dripping with disdain. No, John replied, his voice calm but firm. I've come to end this. The room erupted into chaos. Yarrick, the Varine commander, made a move toward John, but Zara was already there, her alien powers flaring to life. Energy crackled around her, and in a split second she had incapacitated him, her powers rendering him immobile. The remaining leaders looked on, stunned and unsure of how to respond. John lowered his weapon and stood tall, his gaze unwavering. This isn't about your pride. This isn't about victory. It's about what we leave behind. This war has already cost too much. Tavrin's eyes narrowed. You think you can change anything? The hate runs too deep. Your kind will never understand. I understand more than you think, John said. You've lost your people, just like the Varine and the Nashari have. But there's one thing I've learned. We don't have to keep fighting. There's always another way. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then, Tavrin spoke again, his voice quieter now, more contemplative. And what if you're wrong? What if this is the only way? Then I'll fight to prove that love and compassion are stronger than any weapon. And that's when it happened, the twist, the change that John had not anticipated. Yarrick, though temporarily disabled, had somehow regained his strength, and in a final act of desperation, he launched himself toward John, ready to strike. But it was Zara who moved faster. With a wave of her hand, she used her powers to hold Yarrick in place, her eyes burning with intensity. No more, she whispered. I won't let you. The room was filled with the silent tension of a decision hanging in the air. Zara had shown them all that there was more to this war than strength. There was heart. There was hope. And in that moment, John knew that they had won. Not through combat, not through the sharpness of their weapons, but through the power of their love and their belief in a future beyond the war. After the battle, when the dust finally settled, and the leaders of both factions stood in the aftermath, something had changed. Tavrin and Yarrick, though still wary, had listened. Zara's powers, combined with John's conviction, had proven that the old ways could no longer hold. A new path had been forged, one that was rooted in the possibility of peace. As they left the stronghold, John and Zara stood together, their hands clasped tightly. The world around them had not yet healed, but for the first time in a long while, there was hope. And as John looked at Zara, he knew that no matter what came next, their love had transcended the war. They had won not through force, but through the power of their hearts. The battle was over, and the future was theirs to create.